does give me great pleasure to introduce a good friend. Oh, there he is. Michael Sharon, who is the Deputy Superintendent at FEMA's Emergency Management Institute. During the 2021 inauguration, however, he served as FEMA's on-site liaison to the U.S. Secret Service and has been involved in numerous other national security, special security events in his emergency management career. In today's presentation, Mike will share how emergency managers and security professionals work together to plan for, safely execute one of the most complex NSSEs ever seen in the National Capital Region. Mike Sharon.
Sir. Good, had to find the clicker first. So on Monday, we had an opportunity to hear from my colleague Chris Rodriguez a very compelling presentation about one of the darkest days in United States history, the insurrection and incidents at the United States Capitol on January 6th. But from dark days, we also see opportunities. And I had the privilege of being involved in a much brighter day, the 2021 presidential inauguration, which represents the best that's in America, the peaceful transition of power that we expect every 4 to 8 years. So good morning again. My name is Mike Sharon. As Dwayne said, I'm the Deputy Superintendent of the Emergency Management Institute. And you're probably asking yourself right now, did I miss the coffee? Why is the Deputy Superintendent of EMI up here talking about national special security events? Well, as Dwayne alluded to, I have two great jobs. I have the fantastic job of seeing so many of you all day in, day out, coming through the campus at Emmitsburg and other training in the field in my capacity as Deputy Superintendent. But like all FEMA employees, I also have kind of a side job and an emergency assignment. Actually, a couple of emergency assignments, but one of those is working with FEMA's Office of National Capital Region Coordination as a liaison with a lot of our federal partners. And prior to my time arriving at EMI, I had the privilege of serving in FEMA Region 3 up in Philadelphia and was involved in the 2015 World Meeting of Families, the Pope's visit to the United States, which was I will refer to later in the presentation a little bit, as well as the 2016 Democratic National Convention in Philadelphia, because we just couldn't get enough punishment for ourselves in Philadelphia. We had to have 2 NSAs in a row like that. And so in those capacities, I've had the opportunity to have a couple of unique perspectives. One is being involved in the planning of one of these things and the coordination of them from the regional perspective. And since coming down more to the National Capital Region, being involved in the operational side as a liaison and working very closely on the ground with the Secret Service partners. I don't purport to be an expert on NSSEs. I'm not going to make you all experts on NSSEs. There's a lot of great perspectives in this room, folks like Chris and his team at DC8 SEMA. These are large, complex events. I have one perspective, a federal perspective, a FEMA perspective from one part of this, but because of some of the other types of things I've been involved with, I'm here today to hopefully talk through some of the things that I hope you can know, or you want to know, and impart a little knowledge transfer, as my good colleague and friend Jeff Stern says, about what goes on within an NSSE. So if one comes to your town, you're prepared for what to expect. So understanding the process, so we're going to talk a little bit about the process of special events, some of the unique characteristics of NSSE planning and operations, talk some about the inauguration, and then switch back to hit on a few what potential pitfalls. So a very quick overview about special events. So within the Department of Homeland Security, we have a couple of flavors of special events. We have special events, which are known as SEER, Special Event Assessment Rating is what they call them. And these are a lot of the kind of garden variety events that take place year after year, and they're collected up by the Department of Homeland Security and rated through a voluntary data call. So if you're having a large event in your jurisdiction, you submit, the DHS puts out a regular data call looking for these kinds of things, and they assign what's called a SEER rating to each of these. And you see the categories that are up there on the slide of what those SEER ratings might mean, and the way they categorize the events very differently. Very typically, something like the Super Bowl these days, or a lot of those kinds of larger events fall into what's called a SEER 1, and there is some coordination structure that goes on there. And you may see a lot of federal assets that come in to assist, all the way down to SEER 5s, which are events that are on the department's radar, but aren't necessarily things that or may not have any kind of federal involvement whatsoever. So we have special events. And then we have really special events, as I like to call them, which are the national special security events. And the designation for national special security events was first derived out of Presidential Decision Directive 62 in 1998. Everybody remembers what happened kind of around the 1998 time frame while they wrote this up? Well, it was around the time of the Tokyo subway attacks, and a lot of those kinds of things were happening. So President Clinton did PDD 62 to try and prepare the nation for certain kind, and designate some lead federal agencies for certain types of events. And then that was further updated with some Secret Service legislation, what they call the Presidential Threat Protection Act of 2000, which designates the U.S. Secret Service as the lead for planning, implementation, and coordination of operational security at these kinds of events as they're designated. So some of the things that you typically see, but not always, isn't an exhaustive list for potential NSSEs, are of course presidential inaugurations, go through those every 4 years, the nominating conventions, both Democratic and Republican, major international summits. So when I first got to Philly, we were hosting the G20 summit out in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, so that was an NSSE for the folks in Pittsburgh. Major sporting events for a while, early on, post 9/11, I believe the Super Bowl was declared, the first Super Bowl after 9/11 was declared an NSSE, although they've kind of gone back to a Tier 1 posture with those sorts of things. And then a whole host of other activities, and I'll talk about what some of those factors are. The great thing for a lot of these, if you will, is that they take place inside the National Capital Region, and we have a very well-oiled machine and a very well-oiled structure that practices these, because we practice them and practice them and practice them and do them. Travis Cryan from DCHCMO reminded me of about how many there have been in the last 15 years. It was just a mind-boggling number that sort of ran all together. And we also have things like state funerals, sadly enough. So when a president dies, a state funeral is generally considered a national special security event. And then every year we have the State of the Union or a presidential address to a joint session of Congress that gets the same kind of protection. So these things do happen all the time. And they're a significant emotional event if they happen outside the National Capital Region. New York also gets a lot of practice with the UN General Assembly. Oops, there we go. So what goes into deciding whether an event is an NSSE is a couple of things. And as you can see from the process, frankly, it's subjective. There's not some magic formula. First is are there anticipated attendance by U.S. officials or foreign dignitaries? So somebody like the president, in the case of the World Meeting of Families, Pope Francis, high-profile kind of dignitary, as well as a large crowd attendance for both of these events, the size of the event, and the significance of the event. So all of those things go into consideration deciding whether to designate a particular event as an NSSE and cranking up that entire structure. And so what some of those structures look like is a little bit different. And if we have time for questions, we'll be able to take on some of this stuff, or elsewhere I'll be happy to talk in more depth with everybody at our booth or on a sidebar as well. Because an NSSE is organized a little bit differently. And I'm here to tell you, much as it pains my heart, as a card-carrying FEMA person who helps put out the guidance on NIMS and all the rest of that stuff, that it doesn't look a lot like the way you see things typically in event planning and organization. And that can be pretty frustrating. And that's why I'm here this morning to talk about that, set some expectations if you haven't been involved in one of these things about what you're likely to see so that you're prepared for it and can work with our partners effectively. I keep hitting the wrong button. There we go. So the first stage where you see things are going to look differently is in pre-event planning. Our friends, so there are two kind of distinctions that quickly come out in the pre-event planning process for an NSSE. And that's a distinction between crisis management and consequence management, kind of old terms, but important terms. In terms of our lead federal agency partners, the Secret Service, they're really focused on crisis management or more security operations, and not as much on the consequence management or emergency management aspects of the event. They want to make sure the event goes off safely and that their principals or their protectees are taken care of. But beyond a certain point, in terms of training and exercises and things like that, they're not thinking as much as those of us in this room might think about what the potential consequences might be, taking care of the rest of the crowd in a large event, like an inauguration, we may have millions of people, and those sorts of things. So there's a natural tension that's built into this. I think in the NCR, we've gotten a lot better over the years by so much practice of helping alleviate some of that tension. But it's a tension that you're going to see when that NSSE comes to your jurisdiction, because they have very specific interests. They are the lead federal agency, and their interests are a little bit different than emergency managers' interests. And the other thing that's very, very different as a lead federal agency when they organize and run these things is that their structure for planning is a little bit different, and they do things by committee. Not so much necessarily along ICS lines. So the overall structure, they use committees to try and look at all the various aspects of the event. So the committee and subcommittee structure looks a bit like this. When you look at some of the fact sheets that are out there for talking about what NSSEs are and how they're organized, I saw a reference that said, the Secret Service uses a unified command principle, and I'm using the air quotes there and have them on the slide, through what's kind of called an executive steering committee. Yeah, if you step back and squint and look at NIMS, it is sort of unified command, or ICS 400 for the folks that prefer that out there, because you do bring all the agencies to the table. You have a Secret Service lead, typically on the federal side, FEMA helping co-chair that executive steering committee. And then also, for instance, for inauguration or something like that, Chris Rodriguez from DC also sits on that as the local representative. So in that regard, it looks like unified command at the top, and things work a unified command fashion like that at the top. But then from there, you have a series of kind of subcommittees that all then go forth and kind of do the work of getting the event planned and prepared for. And you see the list that's up there, and some of these are kind of interesting because, well, we got a consequence management subcommittee, but we have fire, life safety, and hazmat. But we have fire, life safety, and hazmat, but there's also health and medical. So these things are all split out and they work together. The Executive Steering Committee and also the Consequence Management Committee bring these groups together to crosstalk on a pretty regular basis, which you can see there's a real potential there for the possibility of people going in the wrong direction or not being unified or synchronized, because you have so many committees doing a lot of great work and moving in a lot of different directions. We have a couple up there on the list that are a little bit unique to the NCR. Obviously, you're not going to have a U.S. Capitol Committee with a thing like an inauguration or a joint session of Congress. The Capitol is within the District of Columbia. It is a federal facility, but as my friends at the Capitol are quick to remind us all, they are a separate branch of government, the legislative branch. I'm merely from the executive branch. So they have a different sort of setup there. And then, of course, you may or may not have something like maritime security as well. We have it for the Potomac River in the D.C. area. So you can see a lot of lines of effort that are going on there and a real possibility for things to get out of sync. And you'll also, I want you to soak in kind of the potential committee assignments too, and remember these when we come back to talking about pitfalls. The operational structures are also a little different. So specific to the inauguration, because NSSEs are a bit like disasters. When you've seen one, you've seen one. Although we have a lot of reproducible kind of events within the DC area. So typically for the inauguration, you've got multiple EOCs that are going on. You've got the district, state of Maryland, Commonwealth of Virginia, and all those federal partners that are involved in the NCR. You see a variety of incident command posts. Okay, ICS fans, I know there's not multiple incident command posts. Well, yeah, by doctrine, you're right. But the reality is, U.S. Park Police is going to have something called an incident command post. Metro Police Department may have an ICP, and those things sort of start to spring up in and around the area. You've got multiple emergency operations centers from those entities, certainly the state and federal entities that are up there, FEMA headquarters, those sorts of things. The FBI, Capitol Police, Joint Force Headquarters, National Capital Region all have what they call joint operations centers. And then last but not least, the Secret Service operates, for their lead on the planning and execution of the event, something called a MAC. What's a MAC? Well, by NIMS, it's a multi-agency coordination center. By NSSE, it's called a multi-agency communications center. And it serves a pretty similar function, but the key difference here is it's not so much, again, on the consequence management side. That MAC is focused on the crisis management and security operations aspects of the event. So a little bit different, and again, a lot of things going on out here, a lot of different operational structures. Please tuck that in the back of your mind when we start talking about the pitfalls and the things and other kinds of planning considerations. So in the case of the National Capital Region, and typically other kinds of national special security events, the Secret Service MAC, which is where I spend a lot of time, is located outside the main National Special Security Event area. So in the NCR, it's located outside the District of Columbia at a secure facility over in Northern Virginia. Not super sensitive, but out of respect for my Secret Service partners, I don't want to get into too many details. It's not, deep underground, any of that kind of stuff, but they try and keep the location at least a little bit on the down low to making sure that we're able to keep that location relatively secure and not have folks showing up out there. But the great thing about the MAC, even though it is a communications center and it operates a little bit differently, is that they do a great job of trying to bring together a wide variety of law enforcement, emergency management, and other kinds of partners there, including military and things like that. I call the place the Circle of Trust. And the first time I went to the MAC, I didn't know what I was going to expect. It's the Secret Service. They're a little bit type A. I think we're all pretty type A here. I mean, they're really type A. And I thought, okay, am I going to just, go sit in a corner of FEMA person, emergency managers, and stay out of it? Nah, they've done a great job at that MAC and other MACs. When you're cleared to be in there, you're authorized to be in there. It's in the Circle of Trust. And with a few exceptions, information is widely shared, is expected to be widely shared, and available to everybody, because your role there is to take that, my role there is to take that information and get it back to my partners and make sure that other folks know what's going on. The MAC for the inauguration and other National Capital Region events has pretty cosmic video monitoring capability, probably about the size of these, well, not quite these walls, but about the size of one of these ballroom walls, of video walls with cameras from all over the National Capital Region. Everything you'd want to see, video feeds from aircraft, all that stuff gets pulled in. And we work in that environment. It's mostly unclassified, law enforcement sensitive. There is some classified stuff that goes on, a little bit of the intel. They have a small room, but for the most part, they try and make sure that they're able to share as much as possible on the LES side, so that you're not having to get into necessarily security clearances or things like that at the time of the operation. So it works pretty effectively. One of the tools that they use very effectively for this is something of their own kind of common operating picture, again, kept inside the MAC, called the Surveillance Tracking and Awareness System, or STARS. And STARS is both kind of a mapping common operating picture. It's GIS-based. You can go in and pull up individual cameras, and it's used to do kind of situation reporting and event reporting, great kind of thing. Problem is that it's largely limited just within the MAC, and they like to keep it that way because some of the information in there is law enforcement sensitive. So that becomes the importance of having good, strong liaisons at the MAC, so that you're getting that information, and that you at your EOC or whatever command post, whatever operations center you might be running, have full access to what's going on and a picture of what's going on. So I want to talk a little bit about the road to the inauguration in 2021, kind of how we got there. Plenty of folks that are in this room that I know that were involved in that. So right off the bat, while we have a well-oiled machine in the NCR, in 2020 to 2021, as Chris talked about on Monday, we had some sand in the gears. So first, as you all know, even prior to January 6th, and probably, I don't want to editorialize on it, there was certainly a delayed start to the transition. There's normally a process that begins immediately after the election and the results are declared in November, where there's a bureaucratic planning process that starts, and that really kicks off the detailed planning for the inauguration. Now, we don't have to replan the inauguration every 4 years. I mean, we know what's going to happen at the Capitol. We know certain things are going to take place, and there's normal kinds of events that are going to go on, parades, and usually in normal years, there's galas and all this other kind of stuff that happen. But there's other kinds of specifics that you have to get into, and you already have a limited planning window to try and narrow those things down from November to about mid-January. So as many of y'all may remember, the transition was delayed. The official turnover by the General Services Administration and others did not happen. And so what that meant was that the Presidential Inaugural Committee, which is one of the key factors that's involved in planning and executing the event, where the incoming president's advisors help specify the details of what the incoming president wants in terms of the inauguration, formed very, very late. So we were already working on a pretty compressed time frame because we didn't have officially the kinds of things to be able to start a lot of the detail planning. And typically, and for 2021, the inauguration planning period runs about the 19th through the 21st of the year. Typically, because inauguration happens on the 20th, there's some events that take place ahead of time, and then normally a breakfast on the 21st. So that's pretty much been the way for a number of different years. And then, obviously, we had some rapid changes in plans. Chris did a fantastic job talking about the day that changed so many lives and certainly changed our planning with January 6th. So January 6th most definitely changed things that were already complicated because of COVID and a number of other things. And given those events, there were a couple of things that had happened. So first, FEMA, at the request of the district, issued an emergency declaration for what we call Category B, emergency protective measures, to provide some financial assistance to the district and allow us to more quickly mission assign and move federal assets and pre-position federal assets to get ready for the inauguration. That had only happened one time before related to inauguration. Anybody know the other one? President Obama, 2009, and that was because it was early on. It was very obvious it was going to be massive crowds, and they were going to have really extraordinary crowd control that was going to be needed. This one was a little bit different, more to kind of the security aspects, but it was only the second time that that's happened, so it was very extraordinary. But it freed up a lot of assets, and it gave the federal partners a lot more flexibility to be able to work, and they deployed incident management assistance teams and all this other kind of stuff to assist Chris and company. And then another part of this, which will tell you from a personal side, definitely threw some sand in the gears, was when the acting secretary of DHS, I don't know if he's in the room, he's here at the booth, shifted the start of his booth Mr. Gaynor, shifted the start of the NSSE period to January 13th, 2021. So what that meant was agencies that were prepared to be, we knew something was going to happen, but it accelerated things. So we were on watch for about a week, and much earlier than normally expected. So that became kind of a personnel issue. All right, we got to resource this. Let's make sure we have the people to be able to do a week-long event 24/7, as opposed to just a couple of days and maybe only 12-hour shifts. So I wanted to show you this. It gives you an idea of what the road closures look like, and I'll talk about this a little more when we talk about kind of disruptions for the inauguration in 2021. And you can see it's pretty significant. There's a dark line, if you can see the slides there, that basically represents kind of the hard perimeter, as we call it, in and around the national capital, the Capitol core. So it's right in the heart of the District of Columbia and right along major transportation routes, and you can see that there's bridges that are affected by this, because you got to control egress and access to and from the district. Bridges in and out of to both Maryland, well, principally to Virginia, not really bridges into Maryland up there, are closed down to restrict access. Now, you don't necessarily have a huge population footprint inside the inaugural area. A lot of museums, federal buildings, not really a lot of folks living there. But it's certainly a major traffic disruption that we expect every 4 years, with every inauguration. This one in particular, a much firmer perimeter and a lot more security going on. So it was a significant footprint. It was a bigger security footprint and a more intrusive security footprint than we'd seen in prior years, except for probably 2009, where we had so many people that were involved. So this is we were used to it in the NCR, but this gives you an idea of like what closures can look like. These things are extremely disruptive, and I'll come back to that. We had a massive security presence, as you probably saw throughout the media coverage. Statistics, just on January 20th, we had 25,000 National Guard folks that were on duty. Probably more than that. Chris and Travis can tell you that over the course of the event, I think Chris's figure was hundreds of millions of dollars of security prior to and even after the inauguration. And you see the kind of security that was there with our National Guard folks, as well as a large multi-agency, multi-jurisdictional response of federal, state, local law enforcement partners all coming in to back up the Capitol Police and back up the Metropolitan Police Department. Did such a great job that day. But it was an active day and an active period. And I snipped some stuff out of my log from the MAC to give you an idea of kind of the magnitude of things and then sort of the character or craziness of things that you see. So the Secret Service, over the course of the inauguration, the Secret Service arrested about 13 folks between January 13th and January 20th. And the bulk of those were weapons or ammunition arrests. So one would think, with a security map like I just showed you in a well-publicized event, what would make you try to bring ammunition or an unregistered weapon into the District of Columbia during that time? I don't know. But at least 13 people decided that they wanted to try and do it and got close enough to the Secret Service to get locked up. In addition to that, Metropolitan Police, who does a bang-up job year in, year out, I don't know, Chris and the MPD, SEMA, the MPD team do a fantastic job, 365 days a year, protecting our nation's ability for folks to exercise our First Amendment rights in the district. And they have it down to a science. But MPD also, and the Capitol Police also made a number of arrests. Again, weapons violations, people driving in with a gun in their trunk and they get stopped and searched. What are you thinking? And then one individual attempted to impersonate a police officer, and that person had some mental issues and ultimately went out for evaluation. And then on the day of the event, and I just did a small snippet of things, multiple bomb threats that you might not have heard about, which made our lives very, very exciting in the MAC. Multiple bomb threats against gasoline stations in the vicinity of the inauguration, bomb threat to the Supreme Court at one point, fortunately all unfounded. Things like that going on, and then again, a number also throughout the NSSE period. The FBI and Secret Service were keeping an eye on persons of interest, so we were tracking those individuals as potential disruptors, troublemakers, that sort of thing. So we were following those, and where were they? Had an individual on the 20th show up in the inaugural area in medieval costume. I haven't figured that one out yet, and I don't think we ever quite figured, the person wasn't doing anything wrong, I don't think we ever figured out why he would want to wear a medieval costume to an inauguration, but whatever floats your boat. Oh, and then some serious things, too. We got a report, this ended up being, I put it up here, as Voice of America employees that were spotted on a rooftop near the Capitol. They were spotted on the rooftop by an FBI sniper team. So fortunately, the quick response teams got over there, were able to ascertain who these folks were very, very quickly. But there were some tense moments there, and it could have ended very, very tragically. So I kind of joke about it, but again, if one of these things happens, stay off the roof, stay away from windows, because everybody is very type A. And then also for a while I put an anti-abortion demonstration up there. Not that I'm making light of the anti-abortion demonstration. Folks came out exercising their First Amendment rights. It was kind of near the Supreme Court. Kind of the humorous thing about the demonstration was there were about 20, 30 demonstrators in a circle, and then probably 500 reporters. It's like, hey, we have a crowd of 500. I'm like, oh, no, wait, that's just because of the security presence. Things were relatively quiet, so any kind of attention, everybody went, here it is, it's the big one. No, it's so that made it a challenge, and even we saw with the Justice for J6 rally here in September, trying to figure out just what is the crowd size? How many of these folks are exercising their First Amendment rights, and then how many of them are just live streaming it on Facebook? So I want to talk a little bit, so that's the inauguration. Again, it's not intended to be a full-blown AAR, just kind of give you a taste of some of the things that we experience. And I want to shift over now to talking about, for you in the planning and operational process, avoiding some of the pitfalls, and knowing some expectations of what's going to happen when these folks come to town. So the first thing I need to do, speaking of pitfalls, is skip those 2 slides that somehow I did not hide. So I chose that particular photo for a reason. I love transportation and highways, although Pennsylvania Department of Transportation could do a better job, and the Turnpike as well. But I put the steamroller up there because if you're not actively engaged in the process, if I could have photoshopped it, I'd probably photoshopped the U.S. Secret Service star on the front of the roller, because they're great Americans, and they have we all have they're great Americans. They got an incredibly important job. I'm certainly in the special events business, but also an incredibly important job of safeguarding individuals in the executive branch who are part of our democracy, key parts of our democratic process. But as I mentioned earlier, they're like type AAA. And when they are the lead federal agency, those folks are going to come in, and if you're not engaged, they're going to be the lead federal agency, and they're going to, I probably could have put a train on there too. They're going to drive the train, or they're going to drive the steamroller. So the first thing I would say in the pre-event planning process, and generally if it's not, we work on a much compressed time frame in the National Capital Region, but if something comes to town like we had in Philadelphia, it's probably going to start months out, particularly for a large event. You as emergency managers, please, and Chris alluded to this as well on Monday, assert your place at the table. These folks are type AAA, but they want the same thing. We want to have a safe and successful event, but they have their way of doing business. They're going to start rolling in. They're not intractable, but I'm going to put it on y'all. Should the Secret Service be, maybe a little less AAA? Probably, but we're probably not going to change that. So as emergency managers, when you're notified that one of these things is going to take place, assert your place at the table. You have a right to be there. You have to clean up the mess. When they get their protectee out of there and the person is safe, you're stuck with the response. You've got to clean up the mess. You have a right to be at that table. And they understand that, they recognize that, but they're very mission focused and have a way of kind of steamrolling. So don't be afraid to get in there and assert at all times, make sure that your interests and your community's interests are being represented. That's who you are. That's who we are. We are those whole community conveners. Those folks are coming to town. They're coming to your town. Maybe it's the first time you've had an NSEC or many years. They don't know who the key players are. They're going to try and have to figure that out. You do. We do. We are emergency managers. This is what we do. We bring people together. We know where the assets are. We knit those kinds of things together, and we can offer very valuable insight and assistance to them in the process of making sure that we have a safe and a secure event. And that's why I put the third bullet up there. There's common ground. We have common ground. We all want the same thing. We don't want anybody getting hurt. If it's in your community, you want that event to be successful and not have tragedy, not only because you want your community and your citizens to be safe, but it's a reflection on your community. It makes your community, when these things goes off well, it makes your community look great. So we all have the same interests. We're just kind of coming at it from a very, very different direction. Again, they have a crisis management and event lens. Ours is consequence management and kind of response focus. You want to get started as early as possible. And they do start the process pretty early. For the Pope's visit, I think we started at least a year out in the planning with that. Again, and in the middle of the Pope's visit is when we were notified that the DNC was coming to town the following year, so we had a year there for Philadelphia as well. More compressed time frames in the NCR because we do it all the time. But as early as you can get started and start bringing people to the table, the better. And I also put a bullet up there that says phone a friend. There are a lot of folks that have been doing this, certainly in the National Capital Region, Maryland, Virginia, the district, federal partners. We've been doing this a lot, emergency managers. We want to help. If one of these lands in your lap and you haven't seen it before, pick up the phone. This is why we have great events like the IAEM conference to build these kinds of networks. Think about the kind of people that you meet here that may have done this before, that you can pick up the phone, drop that person an email and say, we're getting an NSSE. What can you do? Give me some tips and tricks. Who should I talk to? Do you know somebody that can help me guide this? Do you know anybody in the Secret Service? That sort of thing. So that works out very well. These events on the planning and preparation side, and this is where I've said, think back to the committee structure, are very resource, personnel, and security intensive. If you're a smaller community, you got to figure out a way across your whole community partners to cover down on all of those committees and subcommittees. You've got to be at the table. But with the way that committee structure works out, that means a lot of folks that are involved in a lot of meetings and a lot of coordination that's going on. So know that it's coming. Think about who you might want to have as a person who can speak for those agencies or speak for your community on those committees so that your interests are aggressively and appropriately represented. I mean, it's security intensive as well. While I mentioned that most of these things operate in a kind of a law enforcement sensitive side, you're going to probably have to assess the need for folks that need to have security clearances for some of the intel information. Again, Secret Service tries to stay out of the highly classified stuff in planning and operations, and there's going to be things that they're doing that they're not going to share, but frankly are not that materially important to the safe execution of the event from our perspective. But you may need to have some needs for security clearances. That's a conversation you want to have with those folks very early on if you don't have people in a fusion center or something like that that are already cleared. And as I mentioned in the pre-event planning, these things are extremely disruptive. There's going to be a ton of asks on you in the year leading up. It's going to consume you in addition to, we just have other things going on like COVID, floods, fires, tornadoes, lightning, all the rest of that stuff. It's a very time-consuming planning process. And it's going to throw off your best laid plans in a lot of ways as you try and get ready, to execute what you do on a day-to-day basis. And in terms of disruption, let me show you this. This is from Philly in 2015. This is the World Meeting of Families, kind of a snapshot of the security plans you see up there. And I put that up, all due respect to the district. It's pretty significant road closures and things like that, but it's the core region of the national capital, federal buildings, museums. This was Philadelphia. Everything inside that light green line, traffic was shut down. Have you been to Philadelphia? I don't think I got a laser on this thing, but if I did, I would show you that this was not only the whole Independence Mall area where we have hundreds, if not thousands of homes, apartment buildings, businesses, federal agencies. We had to Coop Region 3 during the World Meeting of Families, as well as huge swaths of the city that were closed down. The subway system was essentially shut down inside of that area. I mean, you want to talk about disruptive. And in terms of these security plans and the planning, this stuff is a moving target. In the case of Philly, this was kind of a moving target up to about 3 weeks, 4 weeks out from the start of the event. So think about that in terms of public messaging. Well, we're not really sure. I think the people living in those apartment buildings want us to be a little more sure. So that's the kind of, security is security. It is what it is, and they're trying to make smart decisions about this stuff. But that's the kind of disruption you can expect. I don't think we have anybody here from Pittsburgh, but similar kinds of things during the G20 event in Pittsburgh where large swaths of downtown Pittsburgh were shut down. It is going to upend the planning process is going to be bad enough. And then things like that you're going to have to message to the public. It is going to upend your community in a lot of ways, in a positive way, but it is not an insignificant event. And so then I'm kind of sort of close, I guess, talk about what I call game day and beyond. So when the actual event takes place, and you've got those dozens of liaisons that are out there, or you're working in your EOC, or you got folks at the MAC or command post or whatever else, I beg you to please ask yourself the question, whichever organization you represent, federal, state, local, private sector, other, whatever, ask yourself, as the event is taking place, a very important security event, who else needs to know? If you have a nugget of information, if something doesn't feel right, there's a whole system in place. That's why they have that MAC to talk about these kinds of things. So who else needs to know? So if there's a piece of information, a potential threat, or a potential impact to a piece of critical infrastructure that may impede the safe operation of the event or safe crisis management or consequence management, share that information. Be part of the circle of trust. If you were in one of those communications coordination centers, push that stuff back out. If you're an outlying organization, push that stuff up to the max so that everybody can help share that information and make sure that everybody goes home safe and the event goes off very well. And again, on game day, very resource, personnel, and security intensive. Security intensive from a physical security presence because you're going to need every bit of law enforcement, National Guard, whatever, and beyond. to execute because there's intensive physical security requirements. And as I mentioned and showed the operational structures, you're going to want to have liaisons, state and local partners, at all of those places. You're going to want to have a person in the MAC. You're going to want to have a person potentially, if the FBI is set up, or other kinds of command posts, so that you know what's going on. It's not that folks don't want to share information, but even within the STAR system that I talked about, that's just a piece of technology. We would get we got an initial report of a bomb threat that would pop up that someone would quickly enter into STARS. The beauty of the MAC was, okay, you could turn to that person. In the case of the Supreme Court bomb threat, to the Supreme Court Police Department, what is going on? What are you all up to right now? What are the specifics on this sort of stuff? And get to ground truth immediately in a way that's really tough to do through an information technology system. So have those folks there, and especially Secret Service is really good about trying to widen the tent as much as possible, because they've learned that there's going to be a whole lot of people that really have equities that need to be in that room that's going to help them execute a safe and successful event. And as I mentioned too, these things are extremely disruptive. Game day is just going to shut everything down. But it's an opportunity. And the last bullet that I had on the slide is, first, it's an opportunity out of these events to make your community look great and host events of truly national significance. Maybe you've got the president come to town, or you've got a world leader, or something that puts your community on the world stage, and it's an opportunity to look great. But in a larger sense, it's a great place to learn. It's a tough way to learn, but it's a great place to hone those future planning practices and relationships. Because what you learn out of the NSSE process is probably something that you can apply to other kinds of events. Maybe you've got other sorts of large events, sporting events or something like that in your town, and what you learn from the NSSE can assist you in thinking about you're not necessarily going to have the resources that are going to be the same, but thinking about what works well and what you don't want to do. And it'll, again, help you build those relationships with your law enforcement community, with neighboring law enforcement communities. I think of it almost, if the event goes very well, as another kind of exercise, a very well-resourced, very intensive exercise, but a way to hone those plans, hone those relationships, and prepare yourself for the future. Every disaster, every special event is an opportunity to improve, an opportunity to network, an opportunity to be great at what we do and what we're great at every day as emergency managers.